President Trump on Air Force One last night, blaming Democrats for the partial government shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security, now entering day 4.
This is a Democrat shutdown. This has nothing to do with the Republicans. This is a Democrat shutdown. They're upset that the crime numbers are so good. They're very unhappy that the crime numbers are so good. They're very unhappy that there's a movement for getting voter ID.
This comes as Democrats send a counter-proposal to the White House and GOP leaders to get operations open again. So far, no deal. The partial shutdown affecting the TSA, Coast Guard, FEMA, and the Secret Service. TSA officials working without pay, sparking concerns about staffing shortages and possible travel disruptions, similar to what we saw during last year's record 43-day shutdown. Joining me now is Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman. Senator, it's great to have you this morning. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me in.
And I know that the House and Senate are on recess until next Monday. What is the plan do you expect once you're back in session? How long can this shutdown for DHS go on?
I sure hope that we can, but for me, I was the only Democrat that voted to refuse to shutting the government down. And I reminded even the director of ICE in a hearing just on Thursday that this shutdown would not impact the functionality of ICE, that they have plenty of money after the big, beautiful bill. So why shut this down? You can want to reform ICE, and I do, but that's not going to have the impact. But you're willing to shut down all of those very important parts of DHS that you just listed there. That's always wrong. And now here we are, and I'm not sure how we're going to come back online.
You know, it's interesting because one wrinkle could be what President Trump says in his State of the Union address, right? I mean, it's unbelievable to me that the last time in 2019 we saw a previous government shutdown and President Trump was forced to delay that State of the Union because of this. The Democrats, some of your colleagues, are threatening that they're not even going to show up for the State of the Union. Will you be there?
Well, I'm saying it's fundamentally wrong to shut our government down. And if you want to reform ICE, as the Democrats, we do want some ones, but that is not going to do that. And now why you're doing it, for me, it's always about country over party. And that's why I'll refuse to vote to shut the government down. And now with the the State of the Union, well, and I do expect to attend that, and I do hope there's not the same kinds of thing last year with the paddles and that kinds of disruptions. You can disagree or agree on things, but you don't have to turn it into like a spectacle like that.
I totally agree. And, you know, Senator, that's where I think most people are. You might lean to the right on certain things and lean to the left on other things, but people don't want to see this kind of pettiness, certainly from our elected leaders. Meanwhile, the House passed the SAVE Act, as you know, 218 to 213 in the House. The bill now moves to the Senate. Democrats are vowing to block it with the filibuster. You've been very clear. You have no problem with the voter ID. But Maine Senator Susan Collins reversed her position, and now it looks like the Republicans have 51 votes, and they're talking about this so-called talking filibuster. Sir, and I want to get your take on what this means. The president obviously is urging Senate Majority Leaders John Thune to scrap the filibuster altogether and pass the legislation with a simple majority. But it sounds like the Republicans want the Democrats on record to have this quote-unquote talking filibuster so that the public understands who is not for having an ID to vote and who is. I spoke with Senator Bill Hagerty as well as Representative Anna Paulina Luna on this issue over the weekend. Here's what they said. Watch.
We're looking at the talking filibuster. It's something that has not been used in a long, long time. It's a complicated process, but I think we're going to look at every way we possibly can to get this to the floor, to defeat the Democrats' obstructionism, and do something that makes common sense for Americans. We've gone through it as a conference, and now that we have Susan on board, I think we're going to be laser focused on this and any other method that we can utilize to get this onto the floor, because this is obviously something the American people want. I think what we'll have, if we actually implement it, is a higher turnout at elections, because people will have more confidence that the election of their vote is going to be sacred, it's going to be safe, and we're going to have voter integrity.
And I would actually argue that this is probably the #1 thing, especially moving into the midterms. Many senators have said, well, if we do this, the Democrats are going to do this when they regain power. But the fact is, Maria, is that the Senate Democrats have made it very clear that they want mass amnesty, they want mass naturalization of illegals, and frankly, I think they're going to do it anyways. And so the only way to really secure our country for future generations is to ensure that Americans have faith in the voting process, and that if their senators work against their interests, that they can vote them out at the ballot box. And that's exactly what this will do.
Senator, you've been very practical on this issue, I know that, but do you think that's what it's about? Your colleagues in the Democrat Party want illegals to vote? Is that why they're so against it?
Well, there's a lot to unpack in this about the SAVE Act. And now it's not being a serious conversation because right now there's not a Democratic co-sponsor for that. And that's why, because that's necessary because of the filibuster. And that's also part of history to unpack. We, as all the Democrats, we wanted to eliminate the filibuster. We called to eliminate the filibuster. And now we find ourselves that we love it now. And that reminds people that the filibuster is important about bringing on the other parts of to have a conversation. And now for me, there's other parts of SAVE Act that's been problematic for Democrats. But for me as a Democrat, just fundamentally at the end of the day, showing basic ID to vote is a very reasonable idea. And I think 84% of Americans in the last polling from Pew supports that. And Wisconsin, a very, very purple state, just less than a year ago, they put that in their constitution, and that was passed nearly by 2 to 1 margin too. Yeah, so that's if it could just come down to where just showing a state ID, any state ID, I think that would make it a more difficult for Democrats to defend just basic kinds of ID.
So what's in there that's beyond there that's so problematic? In other words, if you had a clean bill just showing your ID to vote, you would support that legislation?
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm a Democrat that's not going to freak out. The world didn't end what happened in Wisconsin. And now in Georgia, for example, Georgia, which I think skews red, I think we'd agree. And after the law, they elected 2 Democrat senators too. So for me, that's kind of where we're at. So there's a lot to impact on that.
Understood. The president has floated doing an executive order to get the SAVE Act across the line. Is that possible, Senator? Or, because, I mean, you're the only Democrat in the Senate who said, yes, you understand voter ID and you're comfortable with it. Is there any way do you see anybody else in your party that in the Senate that you think could support that along with yourself?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't speak for anyone, but what I can say, what I've seen, if it's just a state ID and states provide free ones, I think everybody should have ID, honestly. That allows people to have more chance to participate in our society, whether joining for your library or renting a car or doing all kinds of things. What that excludes for a lot of Americans if they don't have just a basic state ID. Yeah. So, and the vast majority of Americans have no problem with that. And, then there's kinds of examples, whether it's Wisconsin or Georgia, that hasn't really seemed to be like the end of the world. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I'm going to move on and talk about Iran. Your voice has been so important here in terms of support for Israel. And, of course, the president just met with Netanyahu again. U.S. and Iran officials held another round of nuclear talks in Geneva today. I believe the talks at this point have ended this morning as military tensions continue to rise between the two nations. Iranian naval forces, including the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, conducted military drills in the Strait of Hormuz Monday, and special envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are leading these negotiations. I want to get your take on this because in the middle of all of these talks, Senator, it looks like Khomeini is mocking the United States again. First, here's the president on his role in all of this. Watch.
I'll be involved in those talks indirectly. And they'll be very important. We'll see what can happen. But typically, Iran's a very tough negotiator. They're good negotiators or bad negotiators. I would say they're bad negotiators because we could have had a deal instead of sending the B-2s in to knock out their nuclear potential. And we had to send the B-2s. I hope I hope they're going to be more reasonable. I think they want to make a deal. I don't think they want the consequences of not making a deal.
Senator, if this group can't even, sort of hold back on their hostilities against the United States during the talks, what should we expect? Because here are Khomeini's tweets. The U.S. president has said that for 47 years, the United States has not been able to eliminate the Islamic Republic. That's a good confession, I say. You, too, will not be able to do this. Then he goes on to say, the Americans constantly say that they've sent a warship toward Iran. A warship is a dangerous piece of military hardware. However, more dangerous than that warship is the weapon that can send that warship to the bottom of the sea. So now they're threatening us on their nuclear capabilities, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's laughable. I mean, I think it took Israel exactly about 2 days to achieve new air supremacy, and they were begging for a ceasefire about that war last year. And now, absolutely, I supported the B-2s bombing their nuclear facilities as well, too. We can never allow Iran to acquire a nuclear bomb. Absolutely not. And I was the only Democrat to support striking those facilities, and I will be probably the only Democrat again. Now, that's why it's entirely important to make sure that Iran never acquires that nuclear bomb. So I don't think you can trust Iran right now. And they are so desperate now, they were executing thousands and thousands of their young citizens just wanting for rights and democracy too. So I think they're teetering, and I think they're scared. And that's why they put out that laughable tweet just recently, because they know that they're scared and they realize that we mean business, and now we can strike and hit their nuclear facilities again because we have the ability to do exactly that.
Well, I mean, it's literally a threat. I mean, the other tweet from Khomeini says the U.S. president keeps saying that they have the strongest military force in the world. The strongest military force in the world may at times be struck so hard that it cannot get up again.
Yeah, I mean, it's laughable.
Yeah.
I mean, Israel just wrecked them, absolutely wrecked them into submission just last year. And now here we are now. It's like they do not have the capabilities to talk that tough. They can't back it up. And now I hope that there's a peaceful kinds of outcome, but I don't think that's going to happen, because the only thing that they respect and respond to is force, just exactly what we used about destroying parts of their nuclear facilities. And I'll be the Democrat to stand with Israel through that for peace in the region. And now let's call Iran what they are, and they need to be taken out of the business of acquiring a nuclear bomb.
So the president has put sanctions and tried to use diplomacy in this situation since that, taking out the nuclear facilities. But now the president wants the ballistic missiles taken out, and he wants the Iranians to stop supporting these terrorist proxies. You say, look, the world knows Iran's never going to honor any of this and any treaty. So why are we negotiating? What are we negotiating?
Yeah, I agree. I've said that on Twitter just a couple days ago. It's like, why? I mean, to me, it's a waste of time. They only respond by force and strength, and I fully support that. And another thing we want to remind people, if China didn't buy the vast majority of all their oil, that absolutely would have broken that regime. China is willing to support this regime, and they continue to provide the revenue that backs up their regime. So here we are. We can't ever allow these kinds of nuclear ambitions, and now all these other missiles technology too. I will support those kind of strikes, and if we do bring up another Iranian war powers, I will vote no against that too.
Well, you raise a really important point in terms of China, because China acts like a friend to the United States, but then is complicit on every level, undermining the United States. What do you want to see out of this upcoming meeting between the president and Xi Jinping in April? Because I know that there are plenty of Chinese companies that trade on our exchanges. And, I mean, aren't we in many ways just funding the expansion of our #1 adversary here? Are there other things to be doing to get tough with China so that they're not bullying the world like they are right now with their critical minerals?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, they're not, obviously they're not an ally. They're not even, I'm not sure they're even a frenemy. So for me, you know, confront them. Why do you buy all of the Iranian oil? And that props up a poisonous regime and a destabilizing force in the region. Why don't you want peace in Middle East? Why would you want to support that? Because they back the kinds of proxies that, you know, that Hamas and Hezbollah. Why? So I think that's entirely appropriate if the president confronts them and demands that they must stop this kinds of destabilizing force. And it's actually evil standing with a regime like Iran.
Yeah, and you've tweeted about a lot of this as well, and I want to get your take on sort of the response that you get from your colleagues, because you look at all of these issues in such a practical way, which is why you've got so many fans and so many supporters of moderates and Republicans as well. Senator, you've said to me in the past that there's rot within the Democrat Party when it comes to anti-Israel rhetoric among some members. I mean, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez recently suggested that the U.S. should consider reevaluating military aid to Israel. I mean, it was stunning. Tell us more.
No, I agree. You know, I've consistently, that's part of the rot in the Democratic Party. You know, why? If you have to pick a side, why would you pick the side or defend Hamas or defend Iran in a way? For me, stand with Israel. I'll never vote for any kinds of restrictions on aid, whether it's military, financial, or intelligence. There are ever going to be any restrictions on that. And now for here we are, we can have peace. Again, that's become part of the serious problem in our party.
So are the Democrats standing in the way, extremists like AOC, are they standing in the way of peace in the Middle East then?
Well, I'm saying I refuse to pander to the part of my Democratic Party that finds that there's value in being anti-Israel. And that's effectively, they use the word anti-Zionism. I mean, effectively, what that's really become on college campuses and places, it's just anti-Semitism. You know, we have a problem here in our party, and I'm going to stand against that and always unapologetic supporter for Israel.
And I think all of this will be in the President's State of the Union address coming up in 1 week's time. And, of course, then we're all in on watching the midterm elections. You've predicted that the Democrats could regain control of the House and narrow an already very thin, razor-thin lead in the House, in the majority in the Senate. Why is that? Do you not think that some of these issues are resonating with people?
Well, what I do think, I mean, you don't have to be an expert for anything. I mean, as you point out, it's the margin is very close, and there's always, history always tells us there's a backlash against the party in power. There's always going to be some kind of a backlash. So I think most people would have assumed that the House is going to flip. Now, here in the Senate, that's a little more difficult. And now you have other races in the play. For me, like for Texas, for example, Cornyn is a reasonable Republican, and now that would be money in the bank. But now I don't know why politically, I'm not sure why the Republicans and the president wouldn't sit on that and just lock down Texas. But for me, there's other states that are in flux. So that's why I'm saying, focus on things, focus on securing our border and deporting all the criminals and stop all the kinds of tragedies in Minneapolis, and focus on other things that traditionally the Republicans are stronger on, like the economy.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, because I think most people agree that we need to get the criminals out of America, and they don't want to see this kind of crime and chaos. But, of course, the FBI is reporting now that crime numbers are down sharply across the country. Senator, walk us through what you think are the most important priorities for American citizens today going into the midterm elections.
Well, what I think, Americans are constantly responding to affordability, and that's a real issue for many people now. But I don't think that the economy's in the kinds of and it's not really in the kinds of condition, the way the extreme rhetoric would describe it, similar like it was back in 2024. I think the economy is much stronger and more resilient for that. So for me, I would focus on the things that don't really get anybody any upside for that and focus that. Now, thankfully, inflation actually was below the kinds of expectation, and the stock market is up now. I think hit 50,000 now. So for me, focus on those kinds of affordability things. Now, that's, I think, the vast majority Americans want, and less chaos and a lot of the kinds of other chaos. And that's why that's the dynamic that we have here in 2026.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I looked at the numbers the other day. We had almost 5% growth in the fourth quarter. We had an inflation number the other day that was lower than expectations, and we had jobs created that were better than expected. But still, you see your colleagues like Chuck Schumer and others saying that the economy is so bad. I mean, do you think that people understand what's really going on, even though you've got all this politicking underway?
All I'm saying, like, when I'm going to just provide like an honest assessment, you know, the economy was much stronger back in 24 during that, and now I'm going to say that here in 26 now too. Remember, America was obsessed with eggs, the price. And, you know, I do most of the shopping here in my family, and I buy, you know, a dozen for $2. I mean, I think that's incredibly affordable. Yeah. So there's other things now too. So I'm not going to respond to the history on either side. Yeah. I'm just going to say, hey, here's what I think where we actually are, and be very fair about this.
Understood. About the state of affairs today. Senator, it's great to have you on this program. You are a good man, and we appreciate your leadership, sir. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on, Maria.
All right, Democrat Senator John Fetterman this morning. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Now the nuclear talks between the United States and Iran have wrapped up in Geneva. Trey Inks joins me now. Trey, did we hear anything coming out of today's meeting?
Yeah, Ashley, good morning. The second round of negotiations in Geneva, Switzerland, aimed at reaching a nuclear agreement with Iran have finished. Iran's foreign minister says a memorandum of understanding was reached with the U.S., but we didn't get much more than that. We do know, according to Iranian state media, that technical details were discussed, including Iran's uranium enrichment and stockpile levels. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner participated in the indirect negotiations that were led by Omani officials, with Iran's foreign minister leading the opposing delegation. Overnight, President Trump was asked about the talks, saying this.
It's all that a deal is next to impossible. No, I think they want to make a deal. I don't think they want the consequences of not making a deal. They want to make a deal.
As negotiators gathered in Geneva, Iran's supreme leader spoke from Tehran. Amid a crowd that chanted and cheered, the Ayatollah Khamenei issued a new threat against the U.S. Navy.
They keep saying we have sent warships toward Iran. Okay, of course a warship is a dangerous device, but more dangerous than that is a weapon that can send that warship deep under the sea.
This gives you a sense of where things are at in the region. There is a massive U.S. military buildup. President Trump is urging diplomacy, and Iran's supreme leader is threatening the U.S. military. Ashley?
All right, Trey Inks, thank you very much for that. And as we just talked about, nuclear talks wrapping up in Switzerland, but President Trump said he would have his hand in them. Listen to this.
I'll be involved in those talks indirectly, and they'll be very important, and we'll see what can happen. I mean, it's been typically Iran's a very tough negotiator. I would say they're bad negotiators, because we could have had a deal instead of sending the B-2s in to knock out their nuclear potential, and we had to send the B-2s. I hope they're going to be more reasonable. It's told that a deal is next to impossible. No, I think they want to make a deal. I don't think they want the consequences of not making a deal.
All right, joining me now to talk about this, Victoria Coates, National Security Vice President at the Heritage Foundation. Victoria, let's begin there. Iran says they're open to compromise if the U.S. is willing to discuss lifting sanctions. What does that look like, and could that happen? It seems to me that President Trump would not be keen to lift sanctions because they're a huge tool in these negotiations.
Oh, absolutely, Ashley. That's why the Iranians are talking at all. They have an imploding economy. Some estimates have the inflation at 79%. And I would say for the supreme leader, he might have an easier time sinking an aircraft carrier than he does fixing that economy. So that's why they're talking. But they have no interest in actually dismantling their nuclear program, limiting their missiles, or ceasing their support for proxies. And both President Trump and Secretary Rubio have been very clear. Those are the conditions. So we'll see. If they get enough economic pain, maybe there's a deal to be had. But it's hard for me to see it coming out of Geneva right now.
The early attack by the U.S. And Israel on the nuclear facilities, how much does that play into their psyche? Because they know this president will deliver what he promises, so to speak.
No, it should definitely play into their psyche, as well as the fact that for the entire 12-day war, Iran was defenseless in the air against both the Israelis and the Americans. They couldn't do anything about it. And we operated with impunity, as did our Israeli allies, to strike what we wanted to strike. And so they know that. They know they can't do anything about that. And so the president is literally moving the biggest gun in the world, our top aircraft carrier, the Gerald Ford, into the region. It should be there in 5-6 days. We'll see what happens then.
Be interesting. Let's turn to another conflict. The U.S. Holding talks, peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. President Trump pushing for a deal here. Do you think we're making any progress? It feels like we're not, but I'm not behind the scenes.
It's really slow and painful, Ashley. And bear in mind, next week we're going to mark the 4th anniversary of this horrible war and all of the death and destruction that has come with it. And it's just amazing to think it's been 4 long years. And I think to President Trump's credit, he's got the parties at the table at long last. So those conversations at least are some small bit of progress. But really, quite frankly, until Putin decides that the war is too expensive for him, or he needs to start regrouping his military, I don't think we're going to see a final deal. We might get to a ceasefire, and we can all hope for that.
Yeah, at least that would be a start. I want to get this in too, Victoria. Secretary of State Marco Rubio shined on the global stage at the Munich Security Conference this weekend. Meanwhile, several Democrats, potential 2028 contenders, got very poor marks. Many of them used the platform just to blast President Trump. What was your reaction to the speeches? I want to kind of highlight Rubio because I thought his speech was excellent.
It really was. This wasn't a fair fight in any way, shape, or form. Secretary Rubio obviously has been a major figure in American foreign policy for well over 10 years, and it showed. And he gave a really powerful speech following up on the vice president's message in Munich last year about the need for Europe to save itself so it can be a strong partner to the United States. While AOC couldn't seem to find Taiwan on the map, and Gavin Newsom was trying to drive us back into the Green New Deal. So as I said, not a fair fight. Very good look for the administration. Very good indeed. We'll leave it right there. Victoria Coates, great stuff as always. Thanks for being here. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you.
Welcome back. U.S. lawmakers ramping up efforts to advance the stalled Clarity Act aimed at bringing regulatory certainty to crypto markets. The bill facing a Senate standoff over stablecoin reward rules, whether crypto players can pay rewards for customers moving money from traditional banks to the crypto platforms. The White House stepping in to broker a deal, setting a March 1st deadline to move the legislation forward before the midterms. Joining me now is the CEO of Ripple, Brad Garlinghouse, back with us. Brad, great to see you.
Great to see you.
Thank you so much for being here. So you predicted an 80% chance that this bill is signed by April, saying that clarity is better and obviously than uncertainty. Tell us where you get that expectation.
Well, I mean, to some degree, you can never predict exactly how Senate and Congress is going to act. But
unless you're in the prediction markets.
That's we should talk about that too.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Look, actually, the prediction markets around this point, around the Clarity Act, spiked because of some comments yesterday from Senator Moreno, who has been an advocate. I think it's now 90% it will pass by the end of April. I had said a couple weeks ago I thought end of April. At the time, people thought that was a little optimistic. There's a meeting today with a lot of leaders on both sides, the crypto and banking, in the White House. Actually, it's in 30 minutes or so. Ripple's chief legal officer is representing kind of Team Ripple there. But the White House is pushing hard on this, and I think that is a big reason why it will get done. It needs to get done for U.S. leadership. President Trump has been a clear leader and put the stake out there that we need the U.S. to be the crypto capital of the world. That's good for U.S. competitiveness. And that leadership from David Sachs and Patrick Witt in the White House have been really critical around this.
So what's the Ripple position in the meeting today?
Our position is very much don't let perfection be the enemy of progress. No bill that gets to Congress or gets through Congress, no bill's perfect. And I think that it got stalled because I think some in the industry were kind of pushing for something a little bit more perfect. Our view is we need clarity. Ripple has been fortunate, and we got sued by the U.S. government and had a federal judge say XRP is not a security. We have clarity. Yeah. That's brilliant.
And you got that clarity in the Genius Act.
We did get the stablecoin market got that clarity in the Genius Act. But the industry, the crypto and blockchain industry in the United States, needs the same clarity that Ripple had to fight for in the courts. And I think for this
that
industry,
XRP is a security.
XRP is not a security.
Okay.
And that's what the courts ruled very clearly. And so we were very happy to have that. But the whole industry can't live in limbo. And so our argument is the Clarity Act, it needs to get done for the industry to thrive here in the United States.
So how do the rules differ when you're overseen by the CFTC, since the CFTC will oversee non-securities and the SEC will be in charge of securities?
Correct. So if something's a security, you have all kinds of obligations because if you own part of a company, it's a security, then you get dividends, you get right, title, and interest to governance rules, who you elect to the board of directors. That's not true in the crypto industry. And that's, I think, the false narrative that the Biden administration, the war that the Biden administration waged on crypto, ultimately failed in the courts. And I think it failed the United States, failed the people of the United States. And I think trying to push it into a securities framework that was developed literally 80, almost 100 years ago, never made sense. And I think the courts have clarified that. And if we get the Clarity Act passed, I think the whole industry can continue to thrive here.
Very good. Meanwhile, we're talking about a pretty good sell-off in prices. Give us the impact on Ripple. I mean, when you see crypto like Bitcoin down, what, 50% from the highs? Yeah. Others down 40% from the highs. What's behind that, and how has it impacted Ripple?
Well, look, I think one of the things is what we're talking about right now, the lack of clarity. And I think as the Clarity Act got stalled in late January, that certainly didn't help. Look, Ripple had a tremendous year in 2025, and we're starting 2026 in a really strong place because there's more interest from CFOs and treasurers and even boards of directors saying, hey, how could we be using these technologies to make our systems more efficient? Stablecoins, to me, are the starting line. That's where it starts. And it gives experimentation of, OK, now I can move my money 24/7. I can move it more inexpensively. And so stablecoins are the starting point. But blockchain and crypto infrastructure can really change payments broadly. We're seeing that from the Treasurer's office. We're seeing that around what we call prime brokerage services to provide liquidity. Ripple, partly through some acquisitions we did last year, is in a really strong spot as we start the year. To your point about the crypto markets, XRP actually has been the best performing major crypto this year. It's down about 20%. ETH, for example, is down about 33%. And I think the more we demonstrate real practical utility using these technologies to solve real problems, the more you're going to see that play out in a positive way.
Let's go back to the acquisitions that Ripple has made, spending, $3 billion on acquisitions since 2023. You've expanded into custody, prime brokerage, treasury management, stablecoin payments, also launching a new treasury platform. How do you continue to scale this up? You had the $1 billion treasury deal aimed at deepening institutional integration. Brad, give us a sense of where the company goes next with all of these businesses now.
So Ripple has been very focused on how do we build bridges between what we've called traditional finance and decentralized finance, or crypto. And those bridges are kind of the core of where our products sit. what we found in buying a company in the treasury management services business, for example, G Treasury is the name of the company, now called Ripple Treasury, but they processed about or orchestrated about $13 trillion of payments last year. Wow. 0 of those payments were crypto enabled. 0 of those payments were stablecoin enabled. And again, what we're seeing, they have over 1,000 customers, corporates that are using their technologies. What we're seeing is those treasurers, those CFOs, even the CEOs are pushing. They want to see how these technologies can make their systems unlock capital that's been trapped overseas, for example. So we're seeing that push. And now we have a great suite of solutions to introduce crypto to those. But today, again, there's 0 overlap between the crypto solutions and what G Treasury had in the past. So it's bringing those together.
So are you expecting more acquisitions then in terms of scaling it further?
We bought two big companies last year. And so the first half of this year is very much on let's pause. Integrate. That takes some work. I was actually in Chicago yesterday where the G Treasury is headquartered. And, look, I'm incredibly excited by the direction of travel we're seeing. Both of those acquisitions are way ahead of our forecast when we bought them. So we're very happy with that. But for the time being, we're going to slow down for a minute before we speed up.
But you've seen, corporate America spend, hundreds of billions of dollars try to adapt to this new world that we're seeing. On a practical level, tell us how things will change in financial services with regard to the digital asset story.
So what Ripple is focused is very much on the corporate customer. And so I'll answer that less from the consumer point of view and more from the corporate, right? So if you're a treasurer and managing, a balance sheet that has hundreds of millions of dollars in 10 different bank accounts around the world in different currencies. Even Workday, for example, they hadn't hedged some of their foreign currencies and had a $700 million markdown because they hadn't hedged. And what really a big piece of Ripple's business now is that CFO dashboard. Give me visibility to all my liquidity, even if it's held in stablecoins, even if it's held in digital assets. Because as we've seen, more and more companies are saying, we want exposure to this asset class on our balance sheet. And so seeing that all in one place, being able to manage payments, being able to hedge risk, understanding liquidity, getting yield, because a lot of these, it's interesting, we see that portfolio and hundreds of billions of dollars are sitting dormant in, a 10 basis point yield account that could do much better. What
did you make of the Clarity Act getting stalled because partly you had the folks at Coinbase saying, look, we don't like the language here when it comes to the rewards. Is that the only or main sticking point here? What else needs to be done to get that legislation back on track?
So it is definitely the main sticking point. And I think you saw the vast majority of the crypto industry kind of leaning in and saying, hey, while this may not be perfect, this is a major step forward and we need that clarity. I do think the way I think about it as you back up, we need a level playing field for both sides. You've seen the CEO of Goldman Sachs, David Solomon, come out and kind of as an advocate for the Clarity Act because Goldman Sachs wants that same level playing field to compete with potentially crypto companies. I love that. That means the traditional financial industry is coming into the crypto industry more and more, and they want to make sure for them to compete, they have those clear rules of the road.
Very different than what you saw, for example, from J.P. Morgan a couple of years ago.
The tides have changed significantly. And yes, Jamie Dimon has gone from saying very negative things to saying some pretty constructive things. I think as you zoom out and look over the next 10 years, that's going to continue.
Wow. A real changing backdrop here for finance. Brad, great to have you this morning.
Great to see you.
Thank you so much. Brad Garlinghouse from Ripple. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Under President Trump, the United States of America will once again take on the task of renewal and restoration. We in America have no interest in being polite and orderly caretakers of the West's managed decline. We do not seek to separate, but to revitalize an old friendship and renew the greatest civilization in human history.
The Secretary of State in Munich, and this was not a regular diplomatic speech. This was a warning to our European allies. We are together, but the Old West is over. The question is, did they get the message? Welcome to the Big Money Show, everyone. I'm Jackie DeAngelis, along with my co-hosts Taylor Riggs, Dagan McDowell, Kevin O'Leary, and here for the hour, Bahnsen Group founder and managing partner David Bahnsen. Great to see you. Secretary Rubio making it quite clear under President Trump, the U.S. wants partnership, but it won't be business as usual. He took aim at the post-Cold War fantasy that globalism would somehow replace nationalism, that trade alone would guarantee peace, that if we just lowered tariffs and opened markets, then everyone would play fair. Well, they didn't, and now it's time to adjust.
We do not want our allies to be weak, because that makes us weaker. We want allies who can defend themselves so that no adversary will ever be tempted to test our collective strength. This is why we do not want our allies to be shackled by guilt and shame. We want allies who are proud of their culture and of their heritage, who understand that we are heirs to the same great and noble civilization, and who together with us are willing and able to defend it. And this is why we do not want allies to rationalize the broken status quo rather than reckon with what is necessary to fix it.
The West hollowed out its own factories, expanded its welfare states, and outsourced critical supply chains. So it's time to reset the terms. America's not alone here, but it's also not on autopilot either. Europe will need to decide for itself because Washington clearly has. Kevin, I want to come to you first on this. And what struck me in what Marco Rubio was saying, the particular line that I loved, was we don't want our allies to be weak because that makes us weaker. He's talking about strengthening collectively, but things need to be different than they have been.
This all started a few weeks ago at Davos on the famous speech Carney gave, the Prime Minister of Canada, with the words New World Order. That did not go well with the Trump administration, as you remember. Actually, it hurt relations with Canada at this point, which hasn't really restarted on the tariff front. The point is, though, we're getting to a place now where there's only one adversary, and I think it's time to just call it out: China. That's it. And so you either are with us, so to speak, against China, or you're not, because China is getting ready for world dominance. And I call it what it is: economically, militarily, AI, power, you name it. Those guys are not fooling around. And if we don't wake up and get together on this, they will be the superpower. Now, if you're okay with that, and you want to live in that kind of a world, well, I don't. So I'd like to see this thing worked out pretty damn fast, because Europe has to get on board, Canada has to get on board, everybody that believes in democracy, freedom, and capitalism has to get on board, or you will see those guys walk into your country one day.
Wow. And a lot of people are worried about that, looking at Europe and the strength between us and our allies, that sometimes wavers, maybe goes back and forth just a little bit. President Trump has really tried, David, I think, to strengthen NATO, to make countries pay their fair share, but to support us more in that way. How do you think his efforts have been received?
Well, I think that parts of his efforts have not been received well, but I think the parts that matter, what Secretary Rubio was speaking to, there isn't any choice about this. The NATO countries have to be better parts of NATO if this thing is going to last. I thought his speech had moral clarity. I thought it spoke to the undergirdings of Western civ in the right way. He had the right tone and tenor, in my opinion, but also there was strong clarity behind the message. And I think what Kevin said is important. The issue with China is not geographical or ethnic. It is purely about values. We believe in freedom. They are a communist country. That's the moral clarity. I think that we have to, though, be very careful that if we're opposed to them being anti-market, we need to maintain our pro-market stance. We cannot become anti-market in defense of some fighting an adversary that we don't think is adequately for markets. That's the issue to me. We need to hold fast to what we believe in America.
We could talk about China for the whole entire hour, but there were other things that happened in Munich as well. Hillary Clinton made some comments about migration that I think are really important, Dagan, because part of strengthening the United States has been closing off the borders. And I was particularly shocked at what she said. So let's just take a listen.
There is a legitimate reason to have a debate about things like migration. It went too far. It's been disruptive and destabilizing, and it needs to be fixed in a humane way with secure borders that don't torture and kill people, and how we're going to have a strong family structure, because it is at the base of civilization.
It went too far, she acknowledged, and that it was destabilizing.
Always leave it to Hillary Clinton to gasp for relevancy. on the world stage. Where was she when we had no border because Joe Biden and her ilk, the Democrats, were in charge? They did not enforce what is our natural land border. No, it was wide open, and millions of illegal aliens and criminals poured into this country. And the Democrats laid the foundation for cartels, human traffickers, and drug traffickers to profit from human misery. And it also imposed a vast economic and financial and even like moral burden on the rightful residents of this country, but she said nothing. She's saying this now because this is a loser for the Democrats and the liberals, what they have done to this nation. And the president and his administration are trying to right this multi-year wrong, and she knows it. Can we get to AOC? Because she was also on the world stage. I heard someone earlier on the news channel make the comment that, oh, well, you can't really pay too much attention to what she says. She's just a member of Congress. Well, why did she go overseas then and say this?
In a so-called rules-based order. The rules for whom? Because for all too long, the rules only applied to the United States, Europe, its allies, and we would carve out exceptions for the global south. Over the last 5 years, we've seen such a breaking and such a fraying of these alleged Western values that people wonder if it ever existed in the first place.
Matt Whitaker is sitting there looking at her going, I don't even know how to interpret what she's saying. My favorite was, though, when AOC was simply asked, should the U.S. commit troops to defend Taiwan if China invaded? And her answer was literally, well, there's a long history there. We have a long-standing policy. That is literally what she said. She's an embarrassment, but she's clearly gotten ahead of herself in terms of her ambition. So I hope her own party kind of tucks her away somewhere in the back of the underwear drawer.
And when you bring up the Taiwan issue, I think what the president is trying to do by unifying in this way, by strengthening America, worrying about the allies, is a strategy of deterrence, something that we didn't see in the Biden administration. Deterrence was not a strategy they used when Vladimir Putin was moving troops on the border of Ukraine, for example. And then, of course, he invaded, and we all know how that has not ended years later now. So, Taylor, I'm wondering what you think about what the president is doing here. He's got so much on his plate, whether he's dealing with the economics of the United States, or he's dealing with wars that are ongoing, or he's dealing with bigger foreign policy issues in the Middle East. He also is kind of thinking about the big picture long term in this, and his cabinet obviously echoing his sentiment.
And I think it's Marco Rubio who is spot on, who's talking about how we need to be thinking about America first. Doesn't always need to be America alone, but we have to get our allies together, focused on our goals. And we've talked about pulling Europe closer. We just came off of Davos, like you mentioned, Kevin, where there's been a big focus on why Europe isn't innovating. How do we get them to innovate? How do they want to get ahead of AI? Because they finally realized that this big, remember when Germany used to be this big industrial complex and they can't innovate, they can't produce anymore? And so I do like the fact that we're thinking about how America can continue to innovate and lead, but Europe needs to get their act together. And my worry is I just don't think they get it still. I mean, Davos 2025, ahead of Meta, portion made waves when she said, you know, Europe hasn't created a $100 billion business. In that time, the U.S. has created $6 trillion businesses. And then this time around, there's a draft circling about their Made in Europe Act, their Industrial Accelerated Act, which is pushing Europe to try to ensure that manufacturing accounts for 20% of Europe's economic growth by 2035. But in that, they're still talking about green energy, and they're trying to get steel that counts as green because they don't want to think about carbon emissions. And so, Jackie, I look at that and I think, sounds great if you want to look at manufacturing to be part of your economy. But if you're still looking at all your green energy and putting that into proposals, it just shows me you still don't get it.
Right. And there are big ideological differences that are keeping them from innovating the way you're saying they certainly would be able to. But Kevin, it does feel like they don't want to because of those ideological differences. And so I wonder, even with a president like President Trump, when the thinking is so different, how do you bridge that gap?
You're either with us or against us. That's the message, and that's coming loud and clear from the White House, obviously, and that's got to be reconciled somehow. Regarding technology, it's rather interesting because some of the most advanced innovations in AI came from Germany and France, and yet they're not commercialized. They get commercialized in the United States. So you get these amazing geniuses. Once you identify them, we scooped them up, paid them $100 million. One of them went to Meta, and another is going somewhere else, and Elon Musk hires them. They don't get it when it comes to innovation because there's too much belief that you want regulation, not innovation, to govern your economy. And that hasn't worked for them for the last 60 years, ever since the end of the Second World War. You would think the new leadership, the younger leadership in Italy and Germany and France and Switzerland would say, this isn't working, we got to fix it. Because it's not like they don't have the talent. I hire their talent. I steal their talent. All I have to say to them is, you want to stay home in your European country, or you want to make a ton of dough? Yeah. Come over to the United States. That's what happens.
They don't have capital markets. They don't believe in innovating in capital markets. People can sit here and bemoan Wall Street all they want. They have talent. They have technology. They can't monetize it, commercialize it, because they have had no ability to put it out into financial situations for decades. That's the issue why they have no mega cap companies that are successful. It is literally that they hate this idea of finance leading to profits, leading to growth, and so they use regulation as a tool to control their economy.
Also litigation, because they take every large company and sue them for billions, because they don't have any tax revenue from Meta and they don't have it from Google. They just keep suing them. That's a model that's not going to work forever. And I think at this point, with AI emerging, they're trying to build a data center outside of Paris right now off nuclear power. And we are, in the Western society, we're so far behind China on power. And yet, if you look, none of us, not a single country, including the U.S., has advanced electrical power in the last 20 years. We have none. And the Chinese did 511 gigawatts. I keep harping on China because I'm watching them kick our heinies. We got to get focused, including Europe, and say, by the way, invasion on Taiwan will not be with boots on the ground. They will use technology to shut that place down and use drones. And unless we have better AI, they'll win.
They're not necessarily better. They want you to think that they're better than we are in terms of their
AI. More power.
They might have power, and we have people in the White House who are fully aware, coming out of the private sector, Chris Wright in particular, who has a background not only in natural gas, hydraulic fracturing mapping, but also nuclear. He is fully aware of what the multi-trillion dollar, what the $10 trillion investment that was essentially set fire, if you can call it an investment, into climate and green energy technologies. He's fully aware of what has to be done, and the clock's going to run out on him. But the idea is to put in place developments, and I think that tech will innovate on AI and simultaneously innovate on energy, and that they will quickly solve our problem. But it's always good to feel like you're the underdog and know and kind of strive to crush China in every way. But in terms of the administration, I want them to treat China like an adversary, which they are.
They
are. But we don't treat them that way.
But
not out of the White House, we don't.
Here is what I'm worried about. You're fighting the allies who have these ideological differences. They have a completely different business model than we do. You're fighting people like Hillary Clinton and AOC here at home, the progressives in the Democrat Party. And then even within the GOP, sometimes the party can be fractured and not always on the same page. And so I just wonder, and real quick, if you just want to put a button on it, I just wonder how we can move forward and really take China on seriously when there is so much fighting going on.
Well, from my vantage point, the easiest way to have unity is to stand behind the principles you believe in. So I'm a Reaganite through and through. I stand against communism. I stand for markets. There's plenty in the right that still stand for those things, and we can do this together. And Kevin's right. The enemy with China is who we should be focused on. And I think that Europe needs to get in line. And by the way, Europe doesn't need to do it to make us feel better. Europe needs to do it for their own self-preservation.
Exactly. All right.
Welcome back. American manufacturers launching a nationwide push to reshore production just in time for America's 250th birthday. President Trump, of course, has prioritized manufacturing in America with a focus on tariffs, energy dominance, and pro-growth tax policy aimed at boosting competitiveness and lowering the cost of business. The National Association of Manufacturers kicking off its 2026 State of Manufacturing tour tomorrow, spotlighting tax policy, permitting reform, workforce development, energy, and trade. Joining me now to talk more about it is the National Association of Manufacturers President and CEO, Jay Timmons. Jay, great to have you.
Good morning.
Thanks so much for being here. So tell us about the big tour tomorrow.
Yeah, well, we kick off at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in my home state of Ohio. Last time you and I were together, Maria, was at the Reagan Library, and we had Air Force One behind us. And the Reagan era was really a time where we just kicked off America's great competitive advantage. And I think we're at that moment again, and I really can't wait to talk to folks all over the country about where we are at this moment, right before our 250th anniversary.
And of course, President Trump has been behind a lot of this time around, and he is prioritizing getting supply chains to America. What has that meant to manufacturing right now? What kind of changes have you seen since the president has used tariffs to get companies to build it here?
I want to rewind the clock just a little bit to 2017 because President Trump announced his tax plan at the NAM Board of Directors meeting. And he said at that time that if we got tax reform done, that would be rocket fuel for the economy. It absolutely was. We had record investment, job creation, wage growth. Folks were waiting to see what happened this year, or last year rather, to see if the tax bill got renewed. It did. And I think that unleashed a lot of pent-up optimism. Regulatory modernization has helped with that. On the trade front, we're waiting for some more certainty to see where the tariff policy shakes out. Obviously, the president likes tariffs. We get that. We understand that. We just want to see where that's going to land to give us the certainty we need to make those investment decisions for the future.
Well, I mean, he's talking about $18 trillion of new money that he has been able to lure into the country. Is the policy framework then in place now for a sustained reshoring of American manufacturing, do you think? Or you're still waiting on waiting on tariff news?
Yeah, so I think the framework, I think that's a great word, actually. I think the framework is there, and we've got all the details in place for taxes and regulation and energy dominance, right? He's been so forceful and effective on that. Trade is still a little bit up in the air. Look, we're looking at the USMCA trade agreement, for instance, and the renewal of that later this year. That's going to be really important for decisions that are made here in America. So,
yeah, that's
the one point that I think that we're waiting for certainty on, but everything else is looking really good.
It's a very good point because USMCA is the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, but now President Trump is doing bilateral deals. He's doing U.S., Canada, U.S., Mexico. It's not going to be combined the way that it was.
Well,
how does that change?
So you're giving me some inside information because we're waiting to see where that's going to shake out, right?
Well,
it still could be a trilateral, could be a couple bilaterals, but look, he's got to get some concessions, which I think is important. We've seen a lot of Chinese companies figuring out how to go around the current agreement, and we need to make sure that those transshipments are under control and that we are truly manufacturing in North America with North America U.S. companies here in this region.
Yeah, where I got that was Jameson Greer.
Yeah.
Jameson Greer was on our program a month ago, and he told me that the president is looking at those deals in a bilateral nature. But of course, we don't know. It ain't over till it's over.
That's right. He's the master negotiator. We're going to have to wait to see how he comes out on this.
We will see. So I want to talk about AI for a second here, Jay, because manufacturers are helping shape America's AI strategy as well. But AI is being implemented.
We're using it and we're building it too.
Tell me about that, because we have been talking about the concerns around jobs. What is AI doing on the manufacturing floor?
I think AI is additive, right? There's always been, if you look back in history, I mean, you think back 100 years ago, and one of the things I'm going to say, a little little breaking news here.
Okay.
That I'm going to say at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is 100 and whatever years ago, folks were really worried that radios and the phonograph were going to completely disrupt the music industry. Obviously, that hasn't happened. And you've seen this narrative throughout history. Technology is added, machinery is added. That's going to disrupt jobs. It's not true. We have so many millions of jobs here in the United States. In fact, we have 433,000 open jobs today in manufacturing. So AI is additive. It allows us to be more productive. It allows us to produce more products here in the United States. And that's one of the reasons why the administration wants us to be dominant when it comes to AI in the world. And we're there to support that. We obviously need a lot of things with regard to that. So the energy supply is so critical. And that means we've got to focus on grid development and reliability. There are so many issues there as well. But I think we can do this if we all pull together, not at the national level only, but also at the state level.
Well, it's interesting because the data center build out and this issue around power prices has actually become a political issue. You've got people like Senator Bernie Sanders and others who are saying, stop now. Stop the data center build out because it's actually eating up too much energy. And I spoke with Peter Navarro about it on Sunday. Here's what he told me.
What needs to happen, Maria, is that all of these data center builders, Meta on down, need to pay for all of the costs. Emphasize on that. They need to pay, not only pay for the electricity that they're using on the grid, but they have to pay for the resiliency that they're affecting as well. They need to pay for the water. So there's action here going forward where we force them to internalize the cost.
So are you seeing that? Are you seeing companies say, look, we're going to eat the cost on power? Because, look, Bernie Sanders a month ago said we want a nationwide pause on data center development. 25 data center projects have canceled or postponed last month. That's a 56 increase month over month. The president has made a priority being #1 in the world on AI, and that includes data center build-outs.
Yeah, well, the president's right. And I can't say that I often find myself in agreement with Bernie Sanders, so we'll just pass by that. But having said that, I think, look, each state is making its own determination on how to price their energy. But I can tell you the big problem right now is we have huge demand for energy supply. This is not a new problem. It's just a growing problem. And we don't have enough supply. So states really need to focus on what are they going to do to enhance their grid capacity, make it more reliable. Most of the grid was put in place 50, 60, 70 years ago,
Good point.
right?
Yeah.
So let's modernize that. Perhaps there's some incentives from the federal government to allow that to supercharge, the development and the growth of the grid.
Well, this is very exciting, by the way, what you're doing in manufacturing and the president's agenda directing this. So tell us about the AI strategy on the factory floors, supply chains, logistic networks. Where are the jobs?
So about 60% right now of manufacturers are using AI in their operations. In fact, they've used it for a number of years. Probably 80% are going to be deploying AI by the year 2030. So when we talk about 433,000 open jobs, Maria, we're talking about different types of jobs, right? So the way it has happened over the course of the history of manufacturing since George Washington outlined manufacturing as a priority for our country 250 years ago. Each generation, the types of jobs evolve, the skill sets that are necessary evolve. We're going to need more people who are trained in AI, who are trained in technology, to be able to take advantage of the benefits. And I would say this, look, we've got, as I said, 433,000 open jobs in manufacturing. Our Manufacturing Institute, led by Carolyn Lee, will tell you that we need to find people wherever we can get them. And that includes a system of legalized, reliable immigration, which means we need to make some improvements. The NAM has sponsored or endorsed the Dignity Act that's been introduced by Maria Salazar from Florida.
Yes.
And it focuses on the economic needs of this country. And that's exactly what I think we need to do. In addition to securing the border, let's focus on what does America need to succeed in the future.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking earlier about the CEO of Anthropic saying that you're going to see AI eliminate 50% of entry-level white-collar jobs within 1 to 5 years. I think what's different this time around is that it's when you talk about new technology, it's white-collar jobs. Whereas you hear the president talking about we're going to need more electricians, we're going to need more, engineers, we're going to need plumbers, things like that. So when I say to you, where are the jobs? That's what I was looking for. I want our viewers to have a real sense of where the jobs are.
Yeah, we actually call them new-collar jobs, right?
Okay.
Because the economy is very, very different than it has been in the past. And I think 5, 10 years from now, we're going to be looking back and saying, wow, how different we are because of the infusion of technology and AI.
All right, we'll be watching you at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Thank you so much, Jay.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Jay Timmons, stay with us. We'll be right back.
This is a big one, folks. The Supreme Court of the United States just struck down a major chunk of President Donald Trump's tariffs in a 6-3 decision that could reshape trade policy and potentially trigger billions of dollars in refunds. Welcome to the Big Money Show, everyone. I'm Jackie DeAngelis, along with my co-hosts David Asman, Marcus Lemonis, Brian Brenberg, and with us for the hour, Kaltbaum Capital Management President Gary Kaltbaum. Great to see you all. The ruling is that the president's use of the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act, that's known as IEEPA, which he used to impose broad tariffs, was not lawful. Now, here's where it gets a little interesting. The ruling wipes out tariffs imposed under IEEPA, including those reciprocal tariffs on broad swaths of trading partners. The big question is, what is next? What will the administration do? How do you pay that money back if you have to? The court really didn't go there. Lydia Hu's been pouring through all this ruling this morning, and she's here to break it down for us. Hi, Lydia.
Yeah, hey, great to be with you, Jackie. I have been taking a look at this ruling, and you're right, and that the Supreme Court, although they strike down the wide sweeping use of the IEEPA tariffs, they don't squarely address exactly what comes next. But based on precedent and how this usually flows through the procedure of our federal courts, this case would now be handed back down to the lower courts. In this case, it would be the Court of International Trade. And it's up to them to determine whether and how monies that have been paid pursuant to the IEEPA statute would be returned to companies. And as of right now, there are upwards of 1,000 companies or more that have already proactively, preemptively filed their claims to that court saying, hey, I want to be first in line to get my money back if the Supreme Court were to rule this way, as they have, striking down this tariffs. Costco is one example. Bumblebee Tuna is another example. There has been a recent case that flowed through the Court of International Trade in which a similar situation presented itself. The Supreme Court struck down a different type of tax. It was a maritime tax, and it handed the case back down to the Court of International Trade, and they set up a process by which it established a refund for claimants, similar to this to what's happening here. And in that case, they oversaw the refund of roughly $700 million. But I can tell you, Jackie, it took them roughly 2 years to oversee the refund of all that money. And what we're talking about in this IEEPA situation, some estimates say the projection is the money collected through IEEPA would be roughly $170 billion. Some estimates I have seen even more. So it remains to be seen what the process would be like to oversee the return of billions of dollars to 1,000 claimants or more. A much different situation, but that is the big open question at this moment.
Okay, we will get to the open question with the panel, but Lydia, while I have you, I just want to drill down on the ruling itself, because I found this interesting, that the Supreme Court did say the way the president enacted the IEEPA tariffs was to them a tax and therefore not, able to be upheld. But they didn't say that he couldn't do, they said he couldn't do these broad sweeping tariffs, but you could use IEEPA if you were more granular in your approach. You could use other statutes that are out there as well that the president used in his first term to impose tariffs, but that you had to be laser focused. You had to say which country it was, why it was an emergency with that particular country, and why you were going after them, rather than sort of this sweeping range of tariffs. And I thought that was important, that distinction, because it gives him power to move forward, and the other countries are going to realize it might take some time, but he can still do this.
That is correct. The question that was before the court is whether President Trump can use IEEPA to impose tariffs, and it really came down to the interpretation of two words that are included in the IEEPA statute, because it does not expressly say you can impose tariffs. It says it includes the power to regulate importation. So the question was, does regulate importation include the power to impose tariffs? And the Supreme Court says no. But that doesn't mean that President Trump cannot still continue to use tariffs as part of his kind of approach to governing. And in fact, the administration has been very clear. They are ready and they have a plan B. Kevin Hassett was just on this morning talking about that plan B. They're going to rely on other statutory provisions. Section 301 is one that they have spoken about quite a bit. Those other provisions, they're not quite as flexible as IEEPA. They do have some limitations. But I would say we should all be ready and prepared to hear about the plan B that is forthcoming from the Trump administration.
I think you're right, Lydia Hu. Thank you so much. So let's all dig into this here. David, I'll start with you. It was a 6-3 decision. The dissenters were Alito, Thomas, and Kavanaugh. Not particularly surprising there. But I will say this. I'm not a person that will all of a sudden, start criticizing the Supreme Court because I didn't get my way on a particular decision. What they did was go specifically by the statute, and that's what I expected them to do. So I'm not shocked by this ruling per se, but I'm not really sure that in the scheme of things it matters. The market is not falling out of bed over this. I do think it's a very tricky, confusing issue about how you return these funds, if they're returned at all. They were not specific on that. But the president accomplished what he wanted with the tariffs. The sweeping tariffs that he put out brought everyone to the table. They negotiated. Yep. He got some of those non-tariff trading barriers to be removed from these countries. And so now they also realize he's got another avenue to go down if he wants to play hardball. I think that, to me, this is almost a non-issue, aside from the importance of the Supreme Court setting precedent on how you can use it.
I know you're a lawyer, but that is the smartest legal political explanation for what has just happened that I've heard so far today. And what the president wanted to do was to change a trading structure that was essentially developed after World War II to help the world recover from a world war. There hadn't been a fundamental change of that policy where we were working so hard to help primarily Europe, but also we did it with Japan and other countries around the world. And so many of those policies, which may have been very important in the 40s and the 50s and even up to the 60s, had become archaic. They become an old rear view mirror from what did happen, from the way the world used to work, not the way the world is working now. Trump wanted to change that. He did. For all of the bombast from the Trump administration about how they were expecting to win this, I know that there are people in the administration who felt that they were not going to win this. So they have all kinds of plans already in place. The problem is those plans are going to take a while to put into place. It's going to take a long time for them to come up with the studies for whether they use 338, 301, all of the number
I've
tariff
heard at
rules.
least a year.
Yeah, it's going to take at least a year to get this. So it's going to be frustrating for the administration. It likes to get things done immediately, but I think we'll get over it. And as you say, the market is digesting it all pretty well.
I just want to highlight that the president is going to be giving some remarks at 12:45, so we will take him live to hear what his reaction is to this. But Marcus, I heard you talking earlier on the news channel about this specific issue, and I wanted to dive into this. What comes next? They were not specific about returning the money. So what does come next? Consumers paid some of that. Businesses are going to want some back. How do we handle this?
Well, we spent a lot of time talking over the last couple of months that we thought if this did get reversed, would the court say you don't have to give any of the money back, we're just not going to charge it going forward? That still is a possibility. The government says they have the money to give it back. I think the problem is going to be who does it go back to? And that's the problem. You have all these small businesses, medium, large businesses like Costco and the one on Main Street asking for the money back. It's going to disappoint a lot of people. It's not going to go back to them. I don't know that I agree with you on it's going to take a year to put some other action in place. I would have to assume that those folks in the administration who anticipated that there was risk are going to look at 301 the same way they're looking at China. And it's important for the American folks to know that China does not get off the hook here. 301 is still very much intact. 232, which is impacting Canada the most, is still very much intact. So what countries really win here? Well, the UK came out this morning and said they're very happy that the court now understands how to do all these things. The money's going to flow. I just don't know when, if ever.
I'll add to 301 and 232, Brian, that he used in his first term. There's also the Tariff Act of 1930, Section 338 and Section 122. Under 338, if there's discriminatory actions between countries upon us, you can impose a 50% tariff. Under 122, if there are large or serious deficits, you can impose a 15% rate for a certain period of time. So those are two more options that are on the table. Marcus is probably right. They probably have truncated a long timeline here by getting a jump on this as the decision was being mulled over by the court. Your thoughts on the president moving forward? I wonder if he exercises these options, or I go back to my first thought, which is he essentially got what he wanted. You always use the thing in the car with the kids. I'll turn this car around. He turned it around, and they know that he will.
Yeah, they're already heading home. We're not going to Disney World, everybody. That plan has changed. The Tax Foundation, you mentioned all these codes you can use. Okay, there's so many of them. Tax Foundation, not a fan of the tariffs, but they did say he could use Section 122 to basically recoup between 50 and 75% of the revenue that he's already planning to get on these tariffs. So here's what I love. The left is like, yes, this is a win. We have defeated Donald Trump. And he's going to reform, 80% of what he's done already if he wants to. It might be a little harder for him. It is not going to stop him. But here's the part nobody talks about. And I think this is the long-term thing that really matters. Okay. So who decided against the president here? It was the Chief Justice, and it was Gorsuch, and it was Barrett. Okay. And then it was the three liberals, right? What did the liberals have to do to rule against Trump in this case? And they knew they had to do this, and they hate it. They had to line up on the side of the major questions doctrine.
Yes.
Okay, now, and how do you know they know that? Because in their concurrence, what they say is, we think the ordinary tools of statutory interpretation support today's result. We do not join the part of that opinion invoking the so-called major questions doctrine. Sorry, but you did. That's the side you're on. Their Trump derangement syndrome caused them to rule against the very thing 3 years ago in West Virginia versus EPA they wanted to support, okay? Now, you can say they don't care about consistency. They'll just go whichever way they want to. Fine. But now their names are on a decision that says the administrative state can't run amok. Did it work against what Trump wanted here? Yes, it did. But if you love liberty and constitutional government, these guys do not, in my view, they just supported constitutional government and liberty. And I think Trump got a big win there, and nobody's giving him credit for it. I don't even think he's giving himself credit for it right now.
I'm going to do the totally non-legal thought process here, not bring up any code 301s or 275s and things like that. It seems like the Supreme Court said you can't do these tariffs. Oh, but by the way, you can do tariffs.
Right.
Last I looked, the President of the United States right now is Donald Trump. He's not taking a step backward. He's not taking a step sidewards. He's just going to move forward and do whatever he wants to do. Probably less so. But I don't think much is going to change going forward. I don't think we're going to get any, and thankfully, 150% tariffs. I actually think it's a good thing because we still do have to go back to who Congress and taxes, not out of the White House. Good to see that. But the fun part's going to be the refunds. Yeah, try getting any money from the federal government paid back to you.
Right.
See in the year 2037. That's what I think's going to go on there. There already, I believe there's one coalition of 800 small businesses already out with an 8-pager. Give us our money back. They didn't use any 4-letter words, but they just said, give us our money back. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. So I do believe we're going to have a free-for-all going forward. And I think we're going to be back to business. And we keep hearing about Plan B. I think we're probably going to stay with Plan A, just to lesser so, because the Supreme Court, regardless if the president said this was a disgrace, they still do matter.
On the refunds, my assessment is that this will get tied up in court. So those small businesses are going to try to fight the Trump administration. Nobody tomorrow is taking out a checkbook in the federal government to voluntarily try to parse through what will be a very difficult process. And once you go through the court system, it will get tied up there for some time to come. So I'm not really thinking that they're too worried about that right now. In some ways, it was good that the court, for the Trump administration, that the court didn't get into the specifics of that, because it gives them an opportunity to kind of buy some time and figure out what they're going to do. But when I'm thinking about this, most of the trade agreements that we've seen, countries sort of came and they kissed Donald Trump's ring and they reversed things that were annoying him that didn't necessarily have to do with tariffs per se. So as I said, he's already won. But the big outlier in the room is China. Any thoughts on how China's looking at this decision today and saying, we're your toughest opponent. We might actually be what all this tariff nonsense was about. You were coming after us, and we haven't necessarily come to terms with you. Does this strengthen, David, China's situation or their position to fight back against the president?
You know, the Chinese have as many spies in America as we have in the whole world. And that's where they're using their human capital primarily right now. And I think everything that everybody has said here, as brilliant as it all has been, is something that they are already keyed into. They know how long it's going to take. They know that there are other options that President Trump has besides IEEPA. They expected him to lose with the Supreme Court. So I think they have it all planned out right now. Their major concerns are, as always, stealing as much intellectual property as they can to keep pace up with the most innovative country in the earth, and that is the United States. So I don't think it's going to change much there. I should say, though, that the question of the emergency, IEEPA it's an emergency, international emergency is the essentially what IEEPA means. And the Supreme Court didn't specifically say what the emergency was that President Trump, and whether or not they disagreed with that actually being an emergency, but that's basically what they were saying. He just wanted to use the tariffs to get things done, to change policies without there being a real emergency. Again, there may be a specific point. I haven't seen it so far. If anybody here has, I'd be interested in knowing, but I haven't seen them specifically say that there was an emergency of any kind that President Trump was pointing to.
I just want to bring you this from our senior White House correspondent, Jackie Heinrich. She said, according to a source outside the administration on the president's reaction to the tariff ruling during a governor's breakfast, quote, an aide came in, handed him a note. He called it a disgrace, and then he went on with the remarks. Now, he is going to address it, and people are going to want to hear what he has to say. But yesterday, he was in Rome, Georgia, and he was drilling his message home on the economy, because the midterms are just months away, and he's really trying to campaign for the GOP on this and get the message out that they have done, despite all of the tariffs, they have done so much for the economy. Can we listen to what the president said yesterday?
Airfares, hotels, car payments, rent, sports events, groceries. Everything's down. Everything's down. Dairy, eggs, potatoes, and chicken. Core inflation is now the lowest of any time in more than 7 years. The last 3 months, we've had the lowest inflation we have had in over a decade. The last 3 months, it's 1.4%. We had record inflation. You don't have it anymore. We brought back the American dream, and we have a country, I think, that within the next 12 months, maybe sooner, but within the next 12 months, it's going to be the greatest it's ever been.
So I don't think, Marcus, he's going to give this decision too much oxygen, but I think he's going to focus on that message.
He should. Here's what I have not heard today. What's the Fed going to do now? Because they've been saying we can't lower rates because we think inflation is still an issue. We think inflation is an issue because of tariffs. And if tariffs at the level that they were are no longer on the table, what is their argument now, next week, the week after, to not lower rates? The exaggeration that I felt happened a little bit in Georgia by saying everything was cheaper may actually come to fruition if the Fed actually makes this move. And I think we need to focus a little bit more on that. And if I was Trump, I would pivot to, see, I got the rates